beginning of the 2011-12 academic year, it's a great chance to reflect on where we are with state regulation and distance learning. We've come a long way from last October 2010, when the Department for Education made surprise reference to distance learning and state regulation, specifically requiring all Title IV eligible schools to comply with whatever authorization states had in place for schools operating at a distance. These rules created considerable confusion and concern, and in the ensuing months there was much debate about the rationale for the rules and the practicalities of implementation. That led the department to delay full implementation. Originally, these rules, like the rest of the program integrity rules, were to come into force July 1st, 2011, and the department then instituted a 3-year delay, but required schools to undertake good faith efforts towards compliance during that intervening period. In July of 2011, a federal court threw out the distance learning component of the federal regulations around state authorization, arguing that there had been insufficient consultation. This was welcomed, and some argued that the rule was now, from a federal point of view, defunct. However, in EduVenture's view, the rule is very much still relevant. State authorization itself, state authority itself, is unaffected by this federal court judgment, and the federal court ruled on a technicality rather than on the substance of the rule. The court did not rule on the federal government's right to ask schools to comply with state rules as opposed to federal rules. And it's also been argued that the statute, the Higher Education Act, may already contain sufficient authority for the federal government to proceed along its prior lines in requiring Title IV eligible schools to secure state authorization, whether in their home state or in other states. And equally, the department might decide to characterize the 3-year delay to 2014 as a formal consultation, and that might satisfy the court's concerns. Two other main developments are going on that are very relevant here. One is that SHEO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers Organization, essentially the representative body for state regulators, has since April of this year been preparing what they're calling an authoritative account of state regulations, going state by state and getting full detail on exactly what states require of schools under different circumstances. That report is still in preparation, but it is hoped that it will provide full transparency into exactly what states do and don't require. Of course, the difficulty is that many state rules are not fully up to date when it comes to different delivery modes, particularly online delivery. The rules may have been written some time ago. They may be phrased in rather antiquated terms, and the onus may be on states to clarify or revise their rules, and some states have signaled that they're doing that. So while we hope that the SHEO study will be illuminating, it's unlikely to be the end of the story, and it may need to be maintained as a resource rather than being seen as a one-off solution to anything. The second main development is exploratory work by the President's Forum and the Council of State Governments, funded by the Lumina Foundation, in pursuit of what might emerge as an interstate compact on this issue. So rather than at the moment have each of the 50 jurisdictions, each of the 50 states plus the United States territories decide what they require of schools, and schools have to think about all those different jurisdictions at once in terms of their distance learning strategy, might it not be more efficient and helpful all round if there was some sort of compact where states could sign up to a single description of standards that all schools would have to adhere to and not have to get approval in multiple jurisdictions at once. Our understanding is that this work is going well, and many states are open to this idea of an interstate compact, and the Council of State Governments is very experienced with that modality and has forged compacts on a variety of issues over the years. So it looks very promising, and in EduVenture's view would be a far more practical and helpful solution to regulating distance learning that essentially crosses geographical boundaries, as opposed to regulation that was framed at a time when the student and the school and the state were essentially integrated in a way that they're far less so today. The key question is, what should schools do now, given developments and given the considerable flux that still applies in this situation? One is that schools should welcome the fact that for most schools, under most circumstances, compliance is actually quite straightforward. If a school's presence out of state is simply enrolling residents in online programs, then with the exception of a handful of states, there's no authorization requirements. Most states do not wish to regulate schools that simply enroll residents of their state in online programs. There are a few that do that, but the vast majority do not. Similarly, if your institution has no other kinds of presence out of state, if you don't have faculty resident in other states, other staff resident in other states, if you don't offer on-the-ground instruction, practicums, internships in other states, if you don't market specifically to other states, whether online means or other media, if you don't have recruiters on the ground in other states, then in the vast majority of jurisdictions, there is no authorization required. If your institution has some of those kinds of presence, but it's ultimately modest, just a handful of students in particular states, online students in particular states where the state regulates that activity, or you have very modest on-the-ground instructional presence, or you have one or two faculty resident in other states, then our advice is to proceed carefully and with caution. A very undesirable scenario would be for schools to pursue compliance in multiple jurisdictions on the basis of very modest presence, only to find that either the state ends up rationalizing their rules in a more friendly direction, or an interstate compact emerges and invalidates the need to get approval in multiple jurisdictions at once. I wouldn't prioritize those states. The states I would prioritize are states where the rules are very, very clear, where the penalties for non-compliance are very steep, and states where you as the institution have significant presence, where you have a large number of online students. And large might be 10, 20, 50, rather than just one or two. Where you have significant faculty presence or staff presence, where you have a lot of instruction on the ground, where you do targeted marketing, where this market's very important to you, where you do have recruiters on the ground. In those states, if the state wishes to regulate any or some of those things, then it's essential that you explore the details of compliance, that you send a letter to those states if you haven't done so already, explaining your presence and asking for clarification if the rules are not clear as to exactly what you should and shouldn't do. It's equally important to bear in mind that compliance may mean withdrawal of activity. It may be more strategic in some cases to stop doing what you're doing in a particular state rather than continue to do it and seek compliance if your presence is rather modest or rather random. So if it's essentially random that you have one or two faculty resident in a particular state that wishes to regulate that presence, then it may be more strategic to change your staffing configuration and remove yourself from the need for compliance. Similarly, if you have one or two random students in a particular state that does wish to regulate that activity online, then again, it may be strategic to teach out your presence in that state and restrict enrollment in that state or for residents of that state going forward. Finally, and I think the most important thing, is that you should initially prioritize internal understanding. Build a model of your student headcount, of your faculty presence, of your instructional presence, state by state. Know exactly who is where and how that relates to the particular rules of that jurisdiction. Until you have that clear understanding and have a way of tracking that on an ongoing basis as new enrollments happen, as new staffing hires are made, as new marketing strategies are formulated, until you have that system in place that clearly tracks those activities state by state, territory by territory, then it's really premature to start sending letters out or imagining you have to get approved in every single state, when it may be far simpler than that, may be far more straightforward than that, or there may be adjustments you wish to make internally before you start sending out letters. Final thing I want to talk about is EduVentures services in this area. For many years, EduVentures has been conscious of the intersection between state regulation and distance learning, particularly prior to the current period when this issue has become widely discussed and widely known. We have released 3 reports on state regulation and distance learning in 2011, in January, in March, and most recently in July. These are designed to provide schools and others with detailed, objective account of the lay of the land, exactly what each state or agency requires, what some of these federal and non-governmental efforts around this issue amount to, and most importantly, what should schools do at that point in time. We've made these reports widely available, not just to our member institutions in our continuing and professional education learning collaborative and our online higher education learning collaborative, which between them serve close to 200 US universities and colleges. We've decided to make these reports more widely available given the widespread attention and angst and confusion around this issue. Members of our continuing education and online higher education learning collaboratives can contact their account manager to discuss their particular circumstances, to get clarification on what particular states do and don't require, to get clarification on what kinds of presence they should be concerned about, and to get our advice on what they should do now strategically. If a school has a particularly complicated set of circumstances, if it has significant large presence outside their home state, if it engages in a wide variety of instructional, marketing and recruitment activities, if it has faculty spread around the country, if it has students spread around the country online, then EduVentures Consulting Services offers some bespoke assistance. EduVentures Consulting Services has worked with a wide variety of institutions, both for-profit and not-for-profit, both non-degree granting and degree granting around this state regulation issue. We have unique expertise on every single jurisdiction, every single state, every single agency. We've gone into great detail as to all the fine print in terms of exactly what's required and what isn't required. We've been in discussion with state officials to get additional clarification, and we've prepared customized reports for each of these clients outlining, in our view, what exactly they should do now. If you'd like to learn more about any of these services or about our learning collaboratives, then there's a Contact Us button at the top right hand of every page on our website. Thank you.